Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Taylor, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah. So hope you had a good, relaxing New Year, despite everything that's going on in the world. So we had a chance to talk, a few minutes. Good mutual friends with John Surakis, who actually is leading off. We had just released that episode last week. He did kind of an impromptu year in review. So really excited to talk to you. You have a background in the agency space, and then kind of moving on to the data business, if that's the right way to describe it, the right category. And with that, I'd love to just, for those that don't know you, just if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your background and so on.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Taylor Trusty. I'm one of the co-founders of a software company called Signal Insights. So we track, we're basically a competitor tracking platform for companies like 1-800-Flowers, Alarm.com, Crayola. And my background, I grew up in Kentucky, was a programmer from a young age, dropped out of college, started an e-commerce company. And then I started a web development agency, which I ran for 12 years, sold that in 2018, and then co-founded this company 2 years ago, I guess 2.5 years ago now.
Very cool. How did you go about starting an agency? What was it like, 12 some years ago to start a web dev agency in Kentucky?
Yeah. So what was it like? So I used to be a programmer, right? I started programming when I was 13. I liked building things. I still do. I don't program anymore, but I was a tinkerer from a young age. I started building websites when I was really young. My first job was at a web development company when I was 15. I was a programmer there. And that was kind of I just thought it was neat. Like, it was a good combination of things I understood, computers and building stuff. And then over time, I really learned to enjoy the business side of it and more of the sales side, which is a lot more of what I do today. But yeah, I think, how it really started. I used to do contract programming for this guy named Ralph, and we went to lunch and he goes, "Hey, do you want to start a company?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that's how it started. So we were 50-50 partners for the first 5 years. And that's how the business started.
Yeah, that's cool. It reminds me of that, like, Derek Sivers line where he's like, nobody should start a business unless you get asked to start one, So I think that it dovetails with that. Yeah.
A big Sivers guy.
Yeah, me too. So from that, like, how did it progress? Like, you get this, initial partnership, maybe you get some local clients or whatever. Like, it's a big question, but what did those 12 years look like? Like, how did things move along?
Yes. So
less time than that, but
yeah, I think it came in chunks. The first, call it 5 years. I had a business partner. We had known each other. He was much older than me, and we had known each other for a while because I'd done contract work for him. He was more of a designer. I was more of a programmer. Over time, the business grew. We hired employees. We got an office. And I think that we just saw things differently, right? I really wanted to grow. I wanted to build a bigger agency. I wanted a large presence. I was very interested in that. And I don't think that he did. And there's not anything wrong with that. But we kind of parted ways. So he exited the business. After that, I was the only owner. And then we got too big. So we started spending a lot of money. So we got up to 24 employees. There was 1 month where we lost 40 grand in 1 month. And that was a bad day. So like that kind of thing. I think that I was traveling to New York a lot. And I started, I was winning a lot of awards in Kentucky, like entrepreneur. I was like the young, what was it called? Like, it was like young entrepreneur of this like Kentucky Hall of Fame thing. And I think a lot of that really went to my head. I started to think I was really smart and that kind of stuff. And I started like building software products and it just like really went overboard. And then eventually basically I ran out of money. So, I hired all these people, did all these things, I was flying to New York every week, started to think I was a hot shot. And then ran into trouble when I basically ran out of money, laid off a bunch of people. So we went from basically 24 employees down to about 9, had this 5,100 square foot office for 9 people, which looks embarrassing when like clients would come in, they're like, "Are all the lights on? Like, what's going on?" Spent the next few years kind of thinking about what is it that I wanted to build. I met John actually at the same I met John at a conference in Florida at this digital masterminds conference. There was another guy I met there who ran an agency in Indianapolis. We became friends. I really, really liked him as a person. And I was like, maybe I could build an agency like him. And so I just started to, I wanted to build $100,000 projects. That was my goal. I wanted to build very, very large projects for large clients. Fast forward, we won this big account with Toyota, which ended up being about $500,000 a year, and then kind of grew from there. And then, I ended up moving to New York and eventually sold the agency. So that's kind of how the 12 years kind of morphed.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. That must have been a wild ride. And I'm trying to bring this to a good question, but I guess like what if you could do that whole exercise again, and how would you do it differently? Like if you were starting a web design dev shop from scratch, like what would that look like? And maybe you got there towards the end, but I'd love to just kind of color in those lines for people.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about this because I have a lot of friends in the agency world. I used to go to agency conferences all the time, spoken at some of them. And I have a great deal of respect for people in the agency world because I think it's a very hard business to do well. It's long hours. A lot of people don't get paid that well. You're getting yelled at by clients and by employees and everybody else. I think it's like a underappreciated, like tough business, right? And so if I was doing it today, what would I do? Well, there's this great book, Built to Sell. I read that book in 2015. I remember reading it because I read it all in one day. And I was like, oh, this is an epiphany. I could just do what this guy says. And I now listen to the Built to Sell podcast a lot. And what I couldn't figure out is like, okay, cool. Like this book is neat, but how do I actually do this, right? Because for those who don't know, in the book, this guy like runs an agency. He basically goes through his whole metamorphosis. And at the end of it, he is basically like building logos, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. He's like become like a product business, really. It's like a service product business, right? That's all they do. And I think it creates this great story, but it's really hard. Like all the middle steps, like are hard, right? Like, what do I do with my current clients? What do I do with the employees?
Especially like everyone reading that in the agency space, it says logo design just like throws up in their mouth a little bit because It's like the most commoditized thing you could think of. Like there's even a million commoditized, productized logo companies. And so it was like finding whatever that thing is like the really hard part, but it's still a good book. Yeah.
Fully agree. Right. Yeah. So what is the equivalent of that today? I don't know if I know the answer to this, but if I was building an agency today, it'd probably be based around outbound. A lot of what I do today in my software company, like why are we successful? Because we're really good at outbound outreach, right? And I get asked like, hey, would you consult for us or would you show us how to do that? And the truth is that like consulting for it, even if somebody paid a lot of money, isn't worth just doing it for like a software company, or like you could make way more money just building it into a software company, if that makes sense. But to go back to your question, like what did I learn? I think that what I learned is that it's hard to run an agency, and also that if I was to do it all over again, when we went down to those 9 people, I almost would have gone further. Like maybe I would have gone down to like 5 people, get rid of the office, and then really focus on what we were good at, which were and what was profitable, which was doing marketing campaigns. So we were good at those, right? You get paid $10K a month and just really, really focus on that kind of stuff. And like, we were good at user testing and really get down to it. But my ego wouldn't allow it, because my ego would not allow us to get rid of this big office. We eventually did. We moved into another office. But my ego really stood in the way, because I was like, well, who am I if I don't, if I used to have 25 employees and I only have 5, my failure. And that really stood in the way for a very, very long time.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and it's good on you for kind of like coming to terms with that. I think that I always wonder, like, what are those things that I have in my life now? Because we've always been a distributed team. There's not a lot of these sort of like classic, tangible, braggable assets, right? And we've always been a small team, but there's probably other versions of that we all have, So it's interesting to see how those things are going to like change and metamorphosize in the digital world. Like, what are the status symbols that aren't helping you? I think just cause you a lot of stress, right? Like, what do those look like? So it must have been an interesting, you're really compelling process to go through. And from there, so you've built this agency. You're doing, six-figure projects for big companies in the web design field. You've kind of like gone down to a leaner, meaner size. How did the transition out of it go down? Like, how did that play out?
Well, so I met this guy, Jeb, and so John, who introduced you and I, knows Jeb quite well. And I remember seeing him speak at this conference, and he was speaking about this. This was in 2014, and he was speaking about this concept of discoveries. And I was really enthralled with it. I was like, so how do you get a prospect to like pay you to build? And I know there are a lot of people doing this now, but back then, like I couldn't. Again, it was like good to hear in theory, but I had never met somebody who was actually doing it. Like you're telling me that some dude calls you and says, "Hey, we want to build a website," and then you commit someone to give you $10,000, and you don't build them a website. All you build is like a spec. Like, how are you doing that specifically? Like, what are you like? What's the mess? And this guy Jeb showed it all to me. He's like, "Here's exactly what I say to them," and that changed my life because reading about this stuff in theory or hearing on a podcast like this, or I think is very different from somebody who's actually doing it. And when somebody's doing it, they can show it to me in a way that now I can really accept it. And I can like, okay, I'll just copy what you're doing, or I'll just like, you know what I mean? It makes it more real.
Because I can hear our listeners freaking out. Like, what is this guy's name, and what's the book, so we can get it linked up maybe. And if we can figure it out later if you don't know it. Yeah.
Oh, he didn't write. Oh, he didn't write a book. This was all. Are you talking about Jeb? The guy?
Yeah. Or maybe it's just imparted to you, casually.
He just imparted it to me, right?
Okay,
so
cool.
He now runs a software company, but he used to run an agency in Indianapolis called Smallbox, and he's so he kind of just like imparted this with me. And the other part of it is, I lived in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, which is about 2 hours south of Indianapolis, and I said, "Why don't I come see you?" And keep in mind, this all happens in Florida, right? At a conference. And I was dead serious. So I did. So I went there to go see him. I just like drove up there, and he's like, okay, do you want to meet my team? He was the nicest guy. And so I like go around, meet his team. And then it kind of gets to the end of the day, and he says, it's like, do you have a hotel? Like, and I didn't have a hotel. I didn't have anything. And I just figured, I'd figure it out, right? And he's like, well, I guess you can stay at my house. I'm like, perfect. So then I stay at his house with his family, and we just had this amazing time. And I went back to my team, and I was so inspired on here's how we sell discoveries. Here's how we do this. And I got them to buy in. And that's what allowed us to transition to these bigger projects. We hired a new creative director. Like I started paying way more money for talent. I was paying twice as much money for my team than I was before, because I had this vision in my head for if I'm going to sell big projects, I need really, really great team. So that took like 2 years. This all sounds really easy, but it takes a long time. And then, eventually moved to New York. And then at the end, a firm that I met through Toyota actually was like, hey, we're looking to expand. We're looking to buy somebody in your all's area. Would you be open to it? And I said, yeah. And that's kind of how the short version of how it all kind of flowed out.
Yeah, for sure. And there's probably a lot that went on there to kind of get to that level, but to dig into it a little bit, what were some of those insights? Like what did it take to actually be able to sell that $10,000 spec and do the thing that seemed impossible?
Yes. So there were a few things. One, I was really scared at the time to talk about price. So I thought that sales was a game of persuasion. I thought that what it was is that if I talk enough to you, then at some point you're gonna be like, wow, this guy's really smart. And then when I give you a big price at the end, you're gonna be like, wow, I definitely wouldn't have paid that up front, but now that I've heard Taylor, I'm gonna pay it now. And now I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. I think that I had this really broken concept of sales. Like what is sales? And so Jeb was like, look, man, if they don't have the money at the beginning, isn't it much better to know about that so that you don't waste your time? Because like I would go to these seminars like Jeffrey Gitomer, who's this like sales trainer guy, and people like Jeffrey, and no disrespect to him or others, but people like that would be like, if you're a good enough salesman, or saleswoman, then when somebody hears your pitch, they'll mortgage their house to pay for your thing. Then in my head, I'm like, well, I'm a good salesman. They should mortgage their house. You're right. And that mentality is what Jeb got me out of. He's like, look, dude, that's a waste of time. Like, what a massive waste of time. Like, how about instead you talk about price in the first minute? How about when somebody called, because we were getting a lot of inbound leads, and the real challenge is in navigating the leads, right? And that was the real problem. And that was the big breakthrough that he helped me understand, is he's like, you have people coming in the door who will pay more money. But what you're doing is you're treating everybody the same. You're treating the guy who only has $1,000 the same as Toyota.
Yeah.
And that is a disaster. So what we did is, before we would meet with anybody, we did a 10-minute call. We called it a screening call to them. We're like, hey, it's a quick intro call, always a call. And on the call, it'd be like, hi, my name's Taylor. One of the co-founders here. You know, what are you guys looking to do? And then the prospect would say whatever. And then I'd say, no matter what they said, I would say, that sounds great. I'll tell you what. The way we work is we work in this discovery process. We build you some things in advance. We do some research. Minimum engagement for us runs around 75K, and the first year average is 100 to 150K. How's that sound? And then I would say nothing, because what would happen is that they self-select in or out. So if they don't have the budget, or they don't want to spend it, or they don't see the value, they just say, that's not a good fit. Thank you. And then I stopped wasting everybody's time, you know. And then others would say, okay, that sounds interesting. You know, let's meet. And then we would meet. And that one step, like that intro step, and me telling them budget instead of asking them for a budget, was a big deal. And it allowed, and to be frank, like 70% of people said, hey, that's way more money than we want to spend. And I'm like, great. I wish you well. Thanks. Goodbye.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That was big. That was like a big thing.
So that's really interesting, because like I think that I myself experienced like a lot of push-pull between talking about price versus building enough enthusiasm so that people don't qualify themselves out by talking about it too early. So like how did you approach that? Like, for those people that are listening that are kind of developing their agency sales process now, like, was it just, hey, here it is? Or like, what did you talk about first in order to kind of lead into the money discussion on that first call?
Yes. So I want to say that what I thought then and what I think now. In Signal Insights, in this business, I did 465 sales calls in the last 18 months. So like at our peak, which was in October so 4 months ago, I was doing like 8 to 10 calls a day, right? Brand new people. And so how I feel about this now is slightly different than what I did then, but basically it's the same concept, which is that somebody enters a conversation with price in mind. That's the way I feel, right? And that price may change based on the value that they hear, right? But I think it's a very hard conversation to change so let me give specifics. If I believe that the amount of money I want to pay for a website is $5,000, the chances of that going to $8,000 with a good persuasive person, you know, is pretty good, right? But the chances of it going to $50,000 is effectively zero. And so that's what I'm trying to understand. What I'm trying to understand is what world are we talking, right? Because the person who thinks, I would play this game of 5, 50, and 500 when I would talk about this sometimes. I would say, you're in one of three groups. Either you want to spend some variation of $5,000, $50,000, or $500,000. Like, those are the camps. And what I wanted to know is, what universe are you in? Because if what you're thinking is 5, goodbye. If what you're thinking is 50, yeah. And if what you think is 500, then let's really, really talk. I'll fly to go see you tomorrow. And that's what I think was a big breakthrough for me. And by talking about price early, they would divulge which of those three camps they were in. Because by me saying we have a minimum 75 grand, here's what happened is somebody would say, okay, well, I'll tell you what, like, the budget we really have is 60. And so, like, is that a waste of time? And now we're speaking as equals instead of me, I'm the salesperson and they're, the buyer. There's this great book, and there's this great methodology around Sandler. the Sandler kind of sales methodology. And one of the big takeaways in the book is that we are all taught from a young age to lie to salespeople. It's simple, right? Like all salespeople are liars, so we should lie to them. And that concept is built into the agency world, it's built into the used car world, it's built into all these worlds where sales are there. And part of my job as a salesperson is to break through that, is to say, look, man, I don't want to waste your time either. So if this is a waste of time, why don't you tell me and we could both walk away? and that kind of, we're peers here. I think it was a big breakthrough.
Yeah, and I was trained in Sandler myself, and it's great. Just the way that things are phrased and upfront contract, and the idea of just setting expectations and like letting people know clearly what's going to happen from the beginning, I think is like the complete game changer. So to kind of go back into your story, you kind of started optimizing the sales process and kind of gotten to the point of getting acquired. Like how did that acquisition play out? Like when they approached you, what were they looking for? And, and how did that come to taking form?
Yes. So they were more of a development programming agency in Boston, and they, hiring in Boston is not only expensive, everybody focuses on how expensive it is, but it's very competitive. And it's not just salaries that are competitive. It's that recruiters are calling your employees every day. Right. And the recruiters are from Google and Facebook and HubSpot. And, okay. So contrast that with talent in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was. Nobody from Facebook is calling my employees. No recruiter from HubSpot calling my employees. They're not, right? The people I'm competing against, like the companies that I'm competing against is like Humana and, they're good, Brown-Forman, and they're good companies, but they don't have any like sex appeal like the big tech companies do in the major metro areas. And so why were they looking to expand into our area? Part of it is they wanted more talent. Like they wanted good talent in the States that was less expensive, but not like way less expensive, but that was loyal. Like loyalty was a big thing, right? Like the people who worked for us were happy, right? And they weren't, again, getting called by recruiters every single day. So that was a big part of it. In terms of how it kind of came to fruition, I knew the owner because we had worked on some projects together. My team had worked with their team, and we had worked on some work with Toyota, with Brown-Forman, with some of our other clients. And they were looking to expand, and it actually came through my COO because her and him were having a conversation, and he asked her, do you think Taylor would be interested in selling? Because at the time I was pretty much out of the business. I was not involved in the day-to-day.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how did you get out of being involved in the day-to-day, and how did that all play out?
Yeah, well, I've come to think differently on this since as the years have passed. At the time, I thought that here's the truth: when I moved to New York in 2016, I was done with the business. Right, I was done. Like I was mentally done. I didn't want to be in the agency world that long anyway, and I was unwilling to admit it. So everybody on my team knew. They were like, Taylor's checked out. And anytime somebody would ask me, I'm like, no, fully. I tried covering it up by doing things like speaking at a lot of conferences and being very busy, quote unquote, but I was really not effective, right? And that was just a way of hiding from the truth. And the truth was I wanted to be done. And I should have just sold in 2016 or given it to the employees or done something. And so what I did is I really just kind of disconnected. I moved to New York. The whole team was in Kentucky. I just kind of stopped responding to things, and so which kind of slowly, which was fine for a while because we had like some big clients, and the team could kind of do a good job for a while. But over time, the sales pipeline drops. The people, a lot of my relationships were in Kentucky. Those people knew I moved, so they stopped referring us business, that kind of thing. Yes. So it just kind of, I would say that I did not have a purposeful way of disconnecting from the business in the way that I would today. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. And it's funny because like we all read, E-Myth Revisited and this idea like working on, not working in. I've sort of started to rethink that a bit now, and I don't know how feasible it is. And I talk to people that sold their businesses and say that it doesn't work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how do you feel about that philosophy of like, oh, just work on it, don't work in it. You actually can detach and have it grow somehow. Like, how do you feel about that experience after going through it?
Yeah, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I think that in a services business, it is I mean, I say I don't believe it. I think I was the only principal. I was the only owner of the business. I was the face of the business. And the truth is, and what really caused me to sell was one of my clients telling me this when he flew to New York to tell me this, is he's like, look, Taylor, we are paying you all a lot of money because of you. Like we liked you and your team is great and everything else, but we could work with any agency. Anybody would love to work with us. And that was very flattering for me to hear, but it was also like a huge trap, because now I'm like, how can I ever leave this business? Because I think it was the truth. And I think that that's true of a lot of service businesses, to where, it's the personality or the inspiration or the creativity or the technical chops or what have you of certain high level people that cause the clients to stay there and to be there. I believe that to be true, and I think that that's a real struggle of service businesses. Now, how would I change that today, or like how would I have fought that today? I had some high level people that I let leave, that could have almost taken my spot. That had that, and it would have been worth it for me to give them 30% of the business, 40% of the business, but I kind of let ego stand in the way.
Yeah. And how did that? So can you talk a little bit about the acquisition process without getting into anything you're not comfortable with? But how did that back and forth go? What was the jiu-jitsu of the of that process?
Yeah. So I will say the sales price got cut by 60%, right? Which is very common in these types of deals. Somebody throws out a big number, the potential buyer throws out a big number, and it's like, oh, that sounds exciting. Sure, we'll talk. And then, over the months, you kind of get beat down, and you get beat down for this reason or that reason. So what are the reasons that, one gets beat down? One is sales pipeline. Two is the product, the profitability of the current engagements. So selling a business is remarkably distracting, and because it takes months and months, and it's, even if it doesn't take full-time hours. So even if I'm not working out 8 hours a day, my brain is dedicated to that. It's very taxing. And so it's difficult to do anything else. So what happens because of that? Well, the profitability of the firm suffers because I can't focus on, getting new accounts, or of current engagements or whatnot. And so that really hurt when it kind of came down to the wire, because, we were kind of a mess, I would say, in a way.
Yeah, and then that affects, I guess, with the ultimate offer and everything like that. So it's all part of that equation. So I guess, like, is there anything that you would have done differently, or you wish you knew, beyond that, for people that might be approaching a similar process now?
Yeah. One thing is multiple bids. So they approached me and said, hey, we'd like to buy, and immediately I should have hired a broker. And I know that the way I used to feel about somebody like a broker, which is their fees aren't worth it, they're a waste of money, they're a waste of time. I don't feel like that at all anymore. Now I think, oh, no. A good broker creates a competitive bid environment, and they more than pay for their fees. If their fees are 10%, they increase the purchase price by 10%, they just pay for themselves. Not to mention, they're the bad guy. I was negotiating with the principal of the other firm, and we were friends, right? And that's very difficult to be able to say, hey, it's just very, very difficult, right? Because there's politics at play there. Whereas if my broker says it, and then I get to play the innocent good guy, it's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. You know how Jim is, Jim just said that, or Sally, or what have you. So creating a competitive bid situation, hiring the broker, certainly. And then I think something else I would have done, which I was very scared to do then, is I would have gone to one of my local competitors. So I would have gone, because this game is such, like, in my experience, it's like a very localized game, right? The agency world, at least the way we were playing it. And I would have gone to one of my local competitors, like somebody I had a relationship with, not all of them, but maybe like one. There's like one I have in mind that I would have gone to and said, hey, like, could we do a deal? I know and trust you, and here's how that can kind of work for both of our benefits. Because the guy I have in mind, like, he could have become that the kind of inspirational figure again that my team is really looking for since I'd stepped out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really useful to know. So kind of moving into what you're doing now. So what can you tell us about Signal Insights? What is that?
Yeah. So if you've used Google Alerts to track, yourself or any of your competitors, a lot of people find challenges with that, right? Google Alerts turns up a lot of junk, turns up obituaries and real estate listings and fake industry trends and fake industry SWOT analyses. And if your company name is Brattle, then it turns up Brattle Square in Boston. Misnamings and lots of things also that aren't news at all show in results like that. So what we've built is we trained some machine learning models, hand trained them to start, and now they're trained on more data. But we trained machine learning models to filter the junk out. So to filter that kind of stuff out, and which is 92% news, by the way. So 92% of news is either junk or low quality mentions, where Brattle, I'm just making this company name up, but where Brattle is mentioned once in the fourth paragraph of a story, but it's not about them. This whole story is not about them. Only 8% of news is high quality news stories about the company that you think it's about. And so that's a big part of what we solve. So we help you track yourself in the news and the competitors in the news. So you get a daily email with what happened the previous day. But we also show the social media posts that the competitors are making. So what are they posting on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter? What blog posts are they making on their site? What emails are they sending out to their customers? And then some industry topics. So if you want to know what's happening in cybersecurity as a whole, show me authoritative news about cybersecurity. We give you a feed of that. So that's the business. It's all public data. We're just an aggregator and a strong filterer, and only show you the good stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's really cool. And to back up a little bit, how did the idea come about? How did you move into that?
So actually I had this idea in 2014. I had this idea at Blackstone, my last company. And I created a prototype back then. We called it Blackstone Intel. I showed it to some of my clients back then. And I said, hey, if I built this, would you buy it? And a couple of them said yes, but I was too distracted. I was like really in the agency and I was distracted, but I always had it in the back of my head. It's like, if I ever sell Blackstone, I should build this. Like I should make this as a company. So at the very last day, the day I sold a company, August 31st of 2018, on August 30th, I added a clause into the agreement that said, Taylor retains all rights to Blackstone Intel. And they didn't know what it was. They were like, okay, sure, whatever that is. Blackstone Intel became Signal Insights. So I took that concept that I had back then around tracking competitors and built a prototype. I took that prototype. It was non-functional. It was just some pictures. I took it to Toyota, who was my largest former client. And I said, I went to my contact there and said, hey man, like if I build this, would you buy it? And I had asked two of my other former clients and they both been like, not really. But Nick, this guy, he said, yeah, I'd buy it. And I said, okay, say no more. and so we used that. And then, my co-founder now, we were introduced through a former client of mine. And it was just kind of the way this all unfolds, I think is coincidental or what have you. But the day that Toyota said yes, the next day, Keith reached out to me, cold, my now co-founder. And he said, hey, we met a few months ago. I'm just kind of looking for what's next. Like, what are you up to? And had he asked me that a week before, I would have been like, nothing. But because Toyota just said yes, I was like, actually, I might have something here. And I sent him the prototype and we went from there.
Yeah, very cool. So now, running this data business, like, is the grass greener? Like, what's your day-to-day like versus running an agency, and how do those things actually compare? And the reason that, to kind of like frame out that question a little bit, I think, we all have grass is always greener syndrome, and there's always agencies building the side project, building the software product. We're doing that ourselves, right? So I'm knee deep in it. How do you feel about that? Like, what does the day-to-day look like for you now versus in the old business?
100%.
Yes.
Like without a shadow of a doubt, it is better. Yeah. and I'm not, I mean that with no judgments. So I think that some people love the service business. They love supporting clients. They love all of that. I liked it. I never loved it. I thought it was okay. If you had asked me as a teenager what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always wanted to run a software company. So I'm not saying that my experience is the same as everybody else's, but from my experience as somebody who always wanted to run a software company, became running an agency almost by accident, and then, ran it for that long. Yeah, like this is everything I hoped it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, so to be specific, the sales process is way different. So in the agency world, even if somebody told me that it was not a competitive bid, it was always a competitive bid. Like we were always bidding against others. You know who I compete against now? I compete against like interns, because that's my real competitor. My competitor is everything I just told you that we do. Sean does it as an intern, and he builds Excel spreadsheets and he sends out a report once a week. That's what I'm competing against. And by the way, we're a lot cheaper than Sean, and like we're every day. So it's a much easier sale. We say our price like up front. It's just a very transactional sale. In this business, whereas my last business, it was all relationships. I was flying all the time to meet, I was wining and dining, taking people to dinner and drinks. Here, it's like, hey, do you want it or not? Here's how much it is. And, there's some negotiation sometimes, but oftentimes, they just pay with a credit card. 60% of my customers pay with a corporate card. So they just pull out a card and pay for it. So I really like that. Also, there are far fewer people. The way I scaled Blackstone, my last business, was either you charge more per hour, which is tough, or you hire more people, right? So as we got busier, like my revenue and expenses always went in lockstep. And it was kind of feast or famine, which was really tough. Whereas in this business, it's all recurring revenue. I know how much revenue is going to be next month, like guaranteed. So it's different. I'm not saying it's any better, but for me, it is what I kind of hoped it would be.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it's great that you found something that's definitely more compelling than what you, at least to you, individually. And with that, I like to just to kind of do a sidebar on the value of like competitive intelligence and that kind of thing, because there's lots of different opinions. I think some people will say, it's sort of like interesting what your competitors are doing, but you shouldn't get too hung up on it. Others put a lot more stock in it. Like, how do you feel about the value of competitive analysis?
In my last business, when I was in trouble, so when I needed sales or when things were slow or like a major account quits or any of those things happened, I had this, I had something in my toolbox, which was I could go to clients that I have relationships with and basically plead for business, right? I could reach out and be like, Dan, look, you and I have worked together for a while. I'm in a tough spot. Like, do you guys have any work that we could do? Like, do you have any projects or anybody you could refer us to? And because you and I had a relationship, you were more likely to help me out, right? And so I would pull that, let's say once a year when I needed rescue from a client or I needed, work in that way. None of that works in this business because it's not a service, right? I'm selling a product. It's a software solution. We don't sell service as part of our product at all. And so that was very frustrating early on when we had no credibility, when we, and it was peak COVID back then. Nobody was spending money. That was very frustrating. And none of the things that I knew how to do in my last business to rescue myself worked here. So that was like something altogether different.
Yeah, I can imagine that, because it's sort of an easy come, easy go situation where it's
Right.
like the double-edged spear of having everything automated and having like a nice sales process and everything.
Exactly.
I guess the question is like, is there anything that you found to mitigate against that? Is there any sort of like Cialdini, like, thing or copy or widget that improves that retention or gets you more ingrained, or like, what have you learned from that?
I think what I learned is that this is a volume game and that no amount of pleading or anything else worked. And unlike in my last business, right? So in the software world, this is a volume and timing game. And what I learned is that we needed to do more outreach. We needed to send more outbound emails, cold call more people. And that's what it boiled down to. What was scaling up, my back was really against the wall in February of last year, about a year ago. And, we had how many clients? We had like 20 clients back then, and, we were doing okay, but we were losing money, and we have investor dollars, but you got to show that it's really working. And so we just started doing a lot more outreach, which is very different than my last business. So yeah.
Yeah. And I've been there too, and kind of thrown everything at the wall to do outreach and create some very very busy days in both good and bad ways. So,
and people yelling at you, and it's not a lot of fun, right?
Yeah, but it is what it is. It's that versus other problems that could be there. So yeah.
So what was your other? Sorry, I jumped all over you. You had a different question, and I jumped over it.
I'm not sure. I might have lost it too, but I think it was basically the value of competitive information analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something where what I thought early on is that we would have to kind of teach people this in a way, right? We would need to like show you the way, like say, here's how we would use competitive information. Here's how we would do that. And in my experience of what's happened is that either somebody wants it or they don't. In other words, either they're interested in tracking their competitors and they have their own reasons why, like, what are some reasons? So one would be a lack of embarrassment. So it's embarrassing if you're a chief marketing officer, a competitor launches a new product and you don't know about it, or they launch a new campaign, you don't know about it, or they hired a new CMO and you don't know about it, or you're the CEO of this business and those things happen. So that's one. Another is inspiration, or you can call it stealing, whatever you'd like, which is, wow, like, they're running these campaigns, or they just did this job fair and look at the success and the coverage they got, or look at, we score social media posts based on engagement. So you can easily see which of your competitors' posts are doing better than yours maybe. And you're like, why don't we post on that? Why don't we have a campaign like that? So, those are two big ones. And then the third, I would say, is just keeping people in sync. So what ends up happening around competitor information, in my experience, is that maybe 2 or 3 people do it inside of a company, right? Because the marketing person loves it and is interested in it. Maybe the head of biz dev does it. But it's not a company-wide effort. And so because we don't charge per seat, it's unlimited users, you could have the entire company on it and it's not any more money. It's a way of keeping everybody in sync. And if you're a salesperson, it can be really helpful to know what the competitors are doing too. And for some sales teams, we also track their clients. So that's kind of how we've seen it be used.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I could see that being, really compelling for people in that situation. And Taylor, this has been great, kind of getting towards the end of our time. What's keeping you busy in 2022? What are you looking forward to?
What am I looking forward to? So travel. I mean, I'm going to Austin next weekend. I was lucky and was able to travel a lot during COVID too. I traveled a lot before COVID. So just a lot of travel. I enjoy remote work. Let's just call it work from anywhere. But by the same token, I actually miss having an office. So that's also on my mind. We have a very distributed team. My co-founders in New Jersey, other co-founders in Sweden. We have several employees in Sweden. We have a team in Kentucky and Indiana. And I think I want to hire somebody in New York. Like, I kind of miss going to an office and like seeing people again. So that's also on my mind for this year. Like, do we open a small office here and maybe hire a salesperson here too? But yeah, just kind of my girlfriend and I go on a lot of hikes. Tons of hikes, so a lot more hiking. But yeah, just enjoying what the year will bring.
Yeah, me too. And it's good to travel, and Austin's a fun town. So especially like wintertime in New York now. So it's a good time to go down there for sure. As long as there's not another freeze. So hopefully you don't get stuck in that. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Taylor, it's been awesome, man. We'll get everything linked up so people can kind of follow what you're up to, and hopefully we'll do this again.
That sounds great. Appreciate the time, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Take care.